I'd like to welcome everyone today to the Serials and Other Continuing Resources webinar from the Serials and Other Continuing Resources section of IFLA. I'd like to thank you all for being here. This is something we'd intended to hold in person in Dublin last month, and for obvious reasons, we're unable to do that, but we are very, very happy to be able to present some of the excellent presentations we'd hope to present live here in this webinar format, which hopefully will ensure that many who would have been unable to make it to Dublin can enjoy them today. The topic here is international open access practices, strategies beyond the APC model. Open access is obviously a major topic for many of us, most of us, perhaps all of us. And it's very much an international one, and that's why we're very determined to ensure that we could move forward even in a remote setting. We're all working on this. This is all important to us, but it is a global issue, and learning from our colleagues around the world, we feel, is going to be essential to coming up to answers that work both locally and internationally. So we're very much excited about this entire presentation this morning. I would like to give a quick thank to the Planning Committee, especially to Andrea Worth, who has been chairing it. This is a lot of work on the part of the members of the committee. And I hope that their work will provide you with some real value here. And I do want to say a note that this event is being recorded and will be preserved and made available going forward. The talk, of course, is GDPR compliant. I would also like to thank our presenters. I will not go into introducing them because they will be introduced by my colleagues as we move through. But we very, very much appreciate this. Doing this at the same time from around the world is not necessarily easy. So some people it's early, some people it's late, but we really do appreciate this. As I said, this is an international issue. It's very easy to get caught in one's sort of local thinking, but sometimes the only way to come to the answer that works for us locally is to find out what our colleagues are doing globally. So I do want to thank our presenters in advance of their presentations. I'm looking forward to this. I hope the rest of you are as well. With that, I will hand this over to my colleague, Andrea Worth, to introduce our first presenters.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I am here to present our first speakers today. Andrea Powell and Kimberly Parker are giving our first presentation, Avoiding a Widening of the Digital Divide in a Time of Open Access Change, the Short Term and Then. Andrea Powell joined STM as its Outreach Director in November 2018, where she is responsible for coordinating publisher input into the Global Research for Life initiative and for other development and outreach activities. Prior to STEM, she was at CABI, where she was the Chief Information Officer with responsibility for international knowledge, business, and the global IT operation of this nonprofit development organization. Additionally, she is a non-executive director at the Pharmaceutical Press and an associate lecturer at Oxford Brookes University. Kimberly Parker coordinates the Hinari Access to Research for Health program at the World Health Organization. Having worked there since 2008, the biggest challenge and reward in her role is keeping a far-flung partnership dynamic and vibrant as it approaches the beginning of its third decade of engagement. This summer, like many other people in the world, she has been working from home, grateful to have a balcony and pets to keep things lively. And with that, I hand this presentation over to Andrea and Kimberly.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if I can get the screen up and share. Don't want to do that. Okay, today, as you just heard, we're going to, try this again. We're going to be talking about avoiding the widening of the digital divide. I think it's an issue that all of the speakers today will be concerned about. So I do want to note that we're just the beginning of the conversation and you will hear more from our colleagues. So to get started, just to let you know, we're going to be working with Slido as sort of an enhanced chat and dynamic poll tool. You will have seen it in some of the announcements, but if you haven't yet gone to slido.com and the hashtag OA Divide, that's where you can be entering questions right as we speak. And if you're not at all familiar with Slido, this is just a little screenshot that can show you how to flip back and forth between the polls and the question and answer and comments that you may want to be putting in. So what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking about, first of all, a little bit about Research for Life, because that's where our knowledge set is arising from. But then beyond Research for Life, why did it work when we were talking about equity for access? And what can we learn from that? Then we turn our attention to OA and the current funding pressures. And then why open access may worsen the digital divide and not resolve it. And finally, we want to engage you on Slido to brainstorm about how we can find a scalability game changer that might help us with what's currently the challenges for open access with equity. So let's start with what is Research for Life. It aims to reduce the knowledge gap between higher and lower income countries by providing affordable access, and you'll notice the bold there, access to academic and professional publications. Currently, we've got 28,000 journals, 96,000 books, and 125 other resources available online in more than 120 countries. That's as of the middle of September. This is a map showing you who can use Research for Life, and it does give you a sense of where the equity challenges are, whether that's for the Research for Life access issues or for other issues like those we'll be talking about soon. So what can we learn from Research for Life, from that access angle of improving the equity for lower income countries? What was the enabling factor for that equitable access? So, early efforts prior to the internet, where publishers were trying to make their publications available for lower income researchers, universities, the whole gamut of people who needed to read the scientific literature in lower income countries. They ran into problems because if you're trying to give away gratis subscriptions, you have to print, you have to package, you have to mail. Things get lost or stolen somewhere along the way. And every incremental cost for that physical object adds up. The more you want to do, the higher the cost, and it's a significant cost. So the internet came along and offered an opportunity due to the scale factor. However, it was still an issue because individual institution interactions meant that every time a publisher was trying to give away its content, they were dealing with individually each institution. And if they tried to give away the content the way they were used to giving it away to institutions that subscribed, they ran into issues of whether the institution at the other end had a fixed IP address, or even if it did, how quickly that fixed IP address turned over as internet service providers in some of the lower income countries were churning. And so it was economies of scale with the internet, but not quite. So Research for Life was the means to consolidate the not quite economies of scale and turn it into something that actually could work for both the publishers and the institutions at the other end of the chain who wanted the access to create a more equitable situation. So the scale was within reach by Research for Life simulating a consortium or a single institution So from the publisher's point of view, there was one point of contact, simplicity of administration. For the programs, the more publishers that were involved, the greater the economies of scale became, slightly more complexity behind the scenes. And it was a publisher neutral opportunity for training, for capacity development amongst the user groups. So the librarians as well as the researchers could look at this question of holistically. And with that, I will turn this over to my colleague, Andrea Powell, who will talk about OA and funding pressures.
Thanks, Kimberly, and I think you're going to drive the slides for me. So if we move on. So when Research for Life began its life almost 2 decades ago, the dominant business model for journal publishing was the subscription model. And so breaking down that subscription barrier was the key value proposition for the users. Of course, we're now in a period of time where we're seeing a gradual shift across to the open access business model. And while on the one hand, that may improve access to research content, not necessarily solve all the problems, but certainly widen up access to information, that shift does not necessarily or automatically improve the inclusivity or the equity within the publishing system itself. So while we now include over 12,000 open access journals within the Research for Life collection, we also know that the majority of research that is being published from the Research for Life countries themselves is still mostly appearing in subscription journals. And in fact, the most recent year that we've analysed, we're seeing at least the vast majority, so 75% of research outputs with at least one author from a Research for Life country is still being published in a subscription journal. So the shift to open access is not happening at the same pace in the global south as it is happening in the north. And of that research, out of that output, the gold open access model, where the user is required to pay a processing charge, a fee of some kind, that model, although it's not the only open access model, it's the most widely used by this cohort of researchers. And of course, that creates lots of challenges around the funding available. It's often hard enough for researchers in more industrialized countries to cover the cost of APCs. For researchers in the South, it's even more of a challenge. So if we're not very careful, a transition to open access for all risks stalling unless we can address these challenges of affordability and accessibility and the inequities. I think we have another speaker talking, so we could mute. I don't know if the organisers are able to mute that microphone. Thank you. Unless we can address the challenges that face researchers in the South, then we risk a situation and a business model that actually becomes more inequitable than the one that we've had up till now. So if we could move on, please. So just a bit more of a kind of a development of that discussion about why open access may worsen the divide and not resolve it. To really understand the nature of the problem, we felt the first place you need to start with an evidence base. We can talk a lot about the inequities of a new business model, but unless we really understand the scale and the nature and the size of the problem, it's very hard to start tackling it. And so in the last couple of weeks, a white paper has been published collectively. It's been co-published by the STM Association with myself as one of the co-authors and Elsevier through their International Centre for the Study of Research, looking at the size of the challenge and how we might address it. So we did this in order to get this solid evidence base so that we could start to plan a campaign or to set out some recommendations for what we could do to actually address the problem. Until you understand that problem, it's hard to do so. Next slide, please. So as well as identifying some of the challenges, which frankly revolve mainly around access to funding and lack of incentive in many of the Research for Life countries to publish in open access journals. But we didn't want to just present a whole list of problems. What we also wanted to do was identify some potential solutions to the problem, solutions that the publishing community, the library community collectively could deal with, not the kind of all of the big problems of funding of the research programs in developing countries. Those are many and great, but we wanted to focus on things that we could practically do to help move the process forward. So we identified, for example, the need to clarify and to provide greater consistency around APC waiver policies amongst publishers. We discovered that many authors in the target developing countries were reluctant to submit their work to an open access journal because they did not understand that there's a waiver policy in place, or they found it difficult to find that information, or they found that it was inconsistent between publishers. And so they opted instead to publish in subscription journals. So greater clarity, consistency would help to improve the inclusivity of the system. Crucially, building capacity in the research community to help them to navigate the pitfalls, for example, of predatory publishing. We know that predatory publishers target researchers in developing countries more than those in other parts of the world where there might be greater sophistication and greater levels of understanding of the nature of predatory publishing. So we need to create pre-competitive capabilities within the researcher community so that they understand how to identify high quality journals and how to go through the submission process. We want to encourage international collaborations in order to improve the diversity and inclusivity of editorial boards, because not only are authors from the developing world sorely underrepresented in the research output, the situation is even worse when we look at editorial boards and the databases of peer reviewers that publishers have access to. And until researchers from the South are able to participate in all of those processes around scholarly communication, then they're going to find it hard to make significant progress. This one area where we feel that maybe Research for Life can actually be part of the solution is to help to raise the profile of research from lower and middle income countries. And we have the additional incentive of supporting the objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals when we look at this challenge. So we are all the time working with publishers around the world and identifying publishers in Research for Life countries to encourage them to make their own research available to their peers in other southern countries. So we see a certain amount of south-south collaboration as well as north-south and south-to-north. And finally, we all have a role to play in advocating for equality of funding to make open access a genuine option for researchers in the global south. Can we move on, please? So with that, I will hand back to Kimberly, and we can start to have a bit more of an interactive discussion around some of these solutions.
And we actually have had a couple of questions, one that came in on the Q&A of Zoom and the other that was posted on Slido. So let's take the Slido one first. With the gold OA being more prevalent than diamond, and in the research that you did, Andrea.
Yes, so the database we used was Scopus to determine this, and Scopus records the business model of the journal in which the articles were published. So we were able to discern under which model. I should emphasize that we did some kind of cross-checking, some similar research using the Dimensions database. So the Scopus database was the one we used for the white paper, but we've also separately done some very similar analysis using Dimensions, which equally identifies and records the business model used in those journals. So the other models are certainly there, and they certainly exist, but the gold APC model was the one that still, and in some ways it surprised us too, it was up there.
And then there was a different question about, have you done much evaluation on why Research for Life researchers are publishing in global north outlets? And the this person, Sarah, says that I suspect it's the research paradigm that privileges prestige journals, which are dominated by the Western research industrial complex.
Yeah, in the white paper, there's some discussion of this. It looks at research output both in what might be called international journals and also ones that are recorded in more regional or domestic journals. And it was the case that researchers want to publish in the top journals, no matter where they're from. And particularly because of some of the highest prestige journals, or many of them are still operating under a subscription model. Therefore, there's no barrier to submitting to those journals, so you don't have to pay a processing charge. And so those journals were referenced. And it is a dilemma, I think, because it's an interesting dichotomy. Because on the one hand, we want to support the domestic and the regional publishing sector in those countries, and there are some countries that have quite active and healthy publishing environments. But at the same time, many of these researchers are incentivized by their own institutions to publish in the more international titles.
And then there was a question about conflict of interest of the authors of the white paper regarding the equitable transition to open access.
Well, what we've tried to do is present an evidence base using the information tools at our disposal. So, we use the tools that we have. We had a third co-author, Rob Johnson, an independent consultant who was also involved and carried out some peer review. So really, I think, I leave you to look at the paper and see if you feel that that was a genuine conflict.
And then the average scientific article currently costs about $2,000. I'm presuming that's the APC cost. The real costs are closer to $200. Would a functioning publishing system with such a price, presume the $200, be affordable for much more people, or is that still too high for the group we're looking at?
I'm not sure whether the $200, or I can't remember what the currency was, the 200 something it comes from. I think what we found was that any price, any cost, particularly if it's in dollars or in international currency, is a barrier. So I think, of course, the lower the price, the more accessible it's going to be. But I think one thing one sort of school of thought that's evolving is that an OPC, a gold model with an APC, a kind of an author based APC, isn't necessarily the right model for these regions, and maybe is only an interim solution as we move across to find other models that are more inclusive.
So we've just launched a little poll here to make this a bit more dynamic for everyone. So if you're on Slido, go in and vote on this poll as to what you feel the most equitable open access option would be. Right now, we've got a little bit of a lead on the Diamond Platinum, with a few people saying green. So we're just kind of curious how this goes. And if we still have time, I think we've only got a few minutes left, we could launch a different poll, which would be about solutions. So I'm seeing a certain staticness on this poll. So we'll go ahead and stop it and give everyone a chance to comment on the choices, and then we will wrap up and hand it over to our next speakers. And you can go ahead and continue entering comments and questions on the Q&A part of Slido as well. Feel free to do that. We'll leave this poll open, but turn it over to our next speakers.
Thank you. I am pleased to introduce the next presentation. The title of the presentation is Open Access Mandates and Policies in Latin American Countries and Universities. Our two speakers are Dr. Felipe Martinez. He is a full professor at the Institute of Research on Library Science and Information at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. His PhD is from SUNY Buffalo in the United States. He was the director of the Center for Library Science Research and coordinator of the Library Information System, HumanX, at the UNAM. Currently, he is the deputy director of the National Library of Medicine of Mexico. Our second presenter is Dr. Juan Miguel Palma Piñe, and he has a PhD in Library Science and Information Studies from UNAM. His dissertation, which received an honorary mention, was entitled "The Information Heritage of Mexican Higher Education Institutions in Open Access, Institutional and Model." He is an associate lecturer for the undergraduate program in Library Science and Information at UNAM. He works as an academic library in the scholarly communication system, HumanX. He is a member of IFLA's Standing Committee of the Latin American and Caribbean section. Juan and Felipe, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Meg. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, everyone. We would like to thank the serials and other continual resource from IFLA, the opportunity to present the most relevant findings that we found in a study we carry out on open access mandates and policies in Latin American countries. The agenda for our presentation will include, first, the context of open access, some open access actors, open access mandates and policies in Latin America countries, our main findings, and some final considerations. Has the emergence of the 3Bs initiatives 18 years ago, government institutions that support research and universities have issued mandates, policies, and guidelines for supporting open access to make scholarly publications available for everyone. In Latin America, these institutional organizations have also generated mandates and policies for supporting open access. Obviously, this fact has motivated development of institutional repositories in diverse countries. Some of these mandates and policies have been included in the Registry of Open Access Repository Mandates and Policies database. At the present time, it can be found in this database 41 policies and mandates from Latin American countries. We think these instruments, mandates, and policies have also encouraged the development of national and institutional repositories in the Latin American countries. We look for at the directory of open access repositories, and we find that more than 600 repositories from Latin American and the Caribbean countries. We take in consideration this, then the objective of this presentation is to show an overview of the open access mandates and policies development in Latin American countries. The main features and their relation with scholarly repository. Obviously, open access movement promotes the publication and outputs from research universities and other research institutions can be freely available without financial, legal, or technical barriers, only giving the authors the corresponding recognition and citation. However, to get this aim, different actors have a direct influence and play an important role in open access. We consider that these actors are mainly the governments in first place, agencies and organizations that support research, and mainly universities and scholarly institutions that have issues, mandates, and policies supporting open access. We think this is the actors that in Latin America countries have an important role in promoting and supporting open access. Then we consider it was important to analyze the role of these actors in mandates and policies for supporting open access, and only we study in a general overview, but also we consider these mandates and policies influence development of repositories. Like it was mentioned, the database of register open access mandate and policies in Latin America includes 41 records about mandates and policies from Latin American countries. What are the main factors? What are the main features and relationships of this mandate with repositories? We analyze this fact, and my colleague Juan Miguel is going to present the main findings of our study.
Thank you, Felipe. Good morning, everyone. The countries with mandates and policies in Latin America are Brazil, Peru, Argentina, Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico, and Bolivia. These countries are identified in the registers in ROAR map. For the analysis content to for Latin America open access mandates and policies, we defined a set of criteria and are the following: country, date, type of actor, mandates and policies, type of application that is divided in mandatory or optional, and number of repositories. With basing the criteria, following we present content result analysis. Presentation is chronological and accord with numbers of mandates and policies identified by countries. In case of Brazil, Brazil has 18 mandates and policies recorded in ROAR map. Dates of these documents are different. For example, the first is 206 of 2010 are 4 and of 2013 are 3. And type of actor has two types. One is of government agencies and 17 of research organizations. In the criteria of type mandates and policies, Brazil has 1 mandate and 17 policies. In type of application, 1 is mandatory and 17 optionals. Also, Brazil has 151 repositories recorded in OpenDoar. In case of Peru, Peru has 6 mandates and policies recorded in ROARMAP. Dates of these documents are different. For example, the first is the 2011, of 2010 are 2, and of 2020 is 1. In type of actor has 2 types. One is of type governmental and others of type institutional. In the criteria of type mandate and policy, Peru has 6 policies. In type of application, 1 is mandatory and 5 optionals. Also, Peru has 154 repositories recorded in ROARMAP. In the case of Argentina, Argentina has 5 mandates and policies recorded in ROARMAP. Dates of these documents are different. For example, the first is the 2011 and other dates have 1. In type of actors has 2 types. One is of type governmental and the others of type institutional. In the criteria of type mandates and policies, Argentina has 5 policies. In type of application, 1 is mandatory and 4 optionals. Also, Argentina has 17 repositories recorded in OpenDoar. In case of Venezuela, Venezuela has 4 mandates and policies recorded in ROARMAP. In the dates of these documents, for example, the first is the 208, 1 of the 2014, 1 of 2015, and 1 no date. In type of actor has 1 type that corresponds to research organizations. In the criteria of that mandates and policies, Venezuela has 4 that are policies. In the type of application, 4 are optionals. Also, Venezuela has 15 repositories recorded in OpenDoar. In the case of Colombia, Colombia has 4 mandates and policies recorded in ROARMAP. Dates of this document are different. For example, first is the 2011, one is of 2015, and 2 are of 2018. In type of actor has 1 type that corresponds to research organizations. In the criteria of type mandates and policies, Colombia has 4 policies. In type of application, 4 are optionals. Also, Colombia has 19 repositories recorded in OpenDoar. In case of Mexico, Mexico has 3 mandates and policies recorded in ROARMAP. Dates of these documents, for example, 2 are of 2014 and 1 is of 2016. In type of actors has 2 types that correspond to 1 of type governmental and the other 2 on type institutional. In the criteria of type mandates and policies, Mexico has 3 policies. In type of application, 3 are optionals. Also, Mexico has 15 repositories recorded in OpenDoar. In case of Bolivia, Bolivia has 1 mandate and policy recorded in ROARMAP. The date of this document is the 207. In type of factor corresponds to 1 of type institutional. In the criteria of type mandates and policies, Bolivia has 1 policy. In the type of application is optional, and also Bolivia has 2 repositories recorded in OpenDoar. So, the general results are following. In total, 7 countries of Latin America have mandates and policies. 4 countries have mandates and policies of government agencies. 3 countries have mandatory mandates and policies. And 3 countries have mandates and policies of research organizations. Remaining mandates and policies have been sponsored by research organizations and universities. For all before mentioned, based on the content analysis and results on different types of open access mandates and policies in Latin America, we can define that mandates and policies that government agencies and research organizations have developed to date to justify open access actions are documents that are intended to guide the stage and define main routes for availability and visibility of scholarly production developed with public funds. Also, in open access mandates and policies, the constant is present use of repository because undoubtedly, open access actors have identified advantage that repositories provide for registration, organization, and establishment of access point to access scholarly production. Okay, my colleague Felipe is going to present final consideration about our study. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. After we did the study, we found that only 4 countries have mandates and policies issues for government agencies. Overall, all the mandates and policies has been issued by university. And mainly the government mandates have an mandatory character. All the remaining mandates and policies was issued by university have an optional character. But although they are optional, they have had an impact on the number of repositories. Overall, we situation answer to the features of Latin American universities and the organization of these universities in Latin American countries. In Latin America, most of the universities has autonomy. It means that each university has their main policies, their main government laws and regulations. But also, although there are only policies and mandates optional, development of repositories has been a great effort in Latin America. Also, we have found that not all the mandates and policies have been recorded in the database of ROAR map. And also, we have found that not all the repositories has been included in ROAR. For the future, it will be very important to complete this initial study to find what are other factors, what are other features of repositories, and what will be the relationship with mandate on and policies. Thank you very much for your attention, and you have some question and comment of about our study. We answer them. Thank you very much.
We have about 2 minutes left. If there's one question that people wanted to ask. I think there are some questions in the Q&A, Felipe and Juan.
Okay.
One of the questions is, can you provide the link to this paper on OA in Latin America?
Okay.
Meg, can I jump in and ask a question here?
Please.
I apologize for that, but I'm sort of curious. I don't know if you have the answer. It's interesting that in Argentina, Peru, Brazil, and Mexico, it was one government agency in each of those countries that had a mandate. Was Was it the same in each country? Were they different ones? I'd be interested to know which government agency in each of those countries was making that mandate and whether there was some conformity among the countries or purely it depended country to country.
Well, these 4 countries has issued government mandates with an only this. And also this answer, like I mentioned it before, the special situation of universities in Mexico and other Latin American countries. All university and most of the scholarly and some of the scholarly institutions have an autonomy in their government. They issue their own policies and government ways. Even they have independence in their budget. The budget doesn't is related with the government support. The government gives a budget, but the university has the right to spend like every institution needs. Any institutions has necessity. Maybe that is the reason. And we find only three government policies have a mandatory character. In Mexico, the government has issued mandatory optional mandate, but it's not mandatory, it's optional. If you wish, you can include your open access outcomes in the national repository. But if you don't have to do that. You have to include, you will include your publications in your university repository only.
Thank you, Felipe. I think we will leave the remaining questions to the end. And Andrea, in a few seconds, will introduce the third presentation.
Again, everyone, I am here to introduce Ms. Hamideh Memari. Ms. Hamideh Memari's presentation is titled Challenges to Various Policies in Iranian Open Access Databases, Proposing a Native Model. Ms. Memari is the Senior Administrator for the ISSN National Center of Iran, where she has worked since 2009. Prior to her work at ISSN National Center, she worked as an expert in authority and book cataloging. She holds a Master of Library and Information Science and is currently a PhD student in Library and Information Science as well. And Hamideh, the slides are all yours. Were you able to share your screen?
Hello.
We can
Hello,
hear
everyone. First of all, I should apologize for my poor connection. The title of my webinar is Challenges of Various Policy in Iranian Open Access Databases, Proposing Native Models. I'm Hamideh Memari from ISSN National Center of Iran. The movement to improve access to research publication began in 1990s, when access to the World Wide Web became widely available and online publishing became increasingly common. Since then, a wide range of non-commercial service has been developed, largely by the scholarly community, to support a stakeholder in the process of OA publishing. More recently, major research funders and higher education institutions have developed and implemented policy to promote or mandate open access to academic research. As the complexity of complying with such access to policies, excuse me, with such policies become increasingly clear. So the reliance on existing support services has grown, yet the initial development of the services often happened originally prior to the widespread adoption of OA policy, and the relationship between OA policy and services remained poorly understood. The need to develop a sustainable infrastructure to support OA is increasingly recognized across the scholarly. Historical background of Iranian database activity goes back to 19th decades when database had restricted access for users. Since 2004, Iranian scientific journals have started to provide free access to users and open access journal publishing. These databases have also begun to compile this kind of publication, and they have joined to open access movement. Open access in Iran. The number of electronic resources, especially electronic journals, are increasingly in step with open access movement in the world. The number of open access publishing go up day by day. Total number of e-journal are 2,700 number, and open access journal are 1,896. In this figure, you can see the current status of open access journal in Iran. You can see that around 80% of electronic resources are open access in Iran. According to the World Directory of Open Access Scholarly Resources Statistics, Iran is one of the top 10 countries in this database. The methodology of this research was conducted by evaluative method, statistical population of 5 introduced Iranian open access databases. All case study database resources are scientific and scholarly periodicals that publish research or review papers in full text, except SID, which accept research projects and conference proceeding too. So we only consider the policy and mandate of the databases that works in the field of journals. We should emphasize that all of these databases work by journal, not by articles. Searching various sources revealed that there is no standard checklist for assessing open access database mandate. So the researcher made a checklist, which the criteria used in this checklist are adopted from some international open access database such as Sherpa, DOAJ, ROAD, DOAB, OpenDoor, and etc. To determine the validity of the data collection tool, the checklist was reviewed by experts and professionals in the field of library and information science and database manager. The policy of these databases was compared with the indicator in the prepared checklist. In some cases, for more information, we interview with the manager of databases. Descriptive statistics are used to describe the basic feature of the data in a study. According to the presented criteria, if database has that criterion, the number 1, and if it doesn't have the criterion, the number 0 was considered. Finally, based on the score obtained by the database in each category, data analyzed by Excel. In the content section, the information obtained from organized observation an interview was analyzed. Now we want to introducing in Iranian open access database. Attempt to establish a database in Iran began in 1983, but did not yield accepted result until late 1980s. Today, among the database that continuously present the electronic form of Iranian periodicals, the 5 databases SID, Ensani, MSRT Journal, Iran Medical Journal Information System, and Iran Journal works as an open access database. In Iran, each open access database has its own policy and mandate, and there is no unique standard and policy. SID, this database launched in the year 2004. This comprehensive database offers 3 kinds of services to the users through the 3 banks: scientific journal, scientific seminar and congress, research project. Include more than 2,135 titles of scientific journals with free access, covered all scientific and scholarly. A comprehensive portal of human science, Ensani, launched in 2010, covered human science and Islamic subject journal. Include more than 1,250 titles of scientific journals with free access. Portal of scientific journals, MSRT, launched in 2014, covered all scientific and scholarly subjects. Include more than 1,296 titles of scientific journal with free access. And it's important, or we should emphasize, that the owner of this database is Ministry of Science, Research and Technology, who is in charge of give license to a scholar journal and assessing and ranking a scholar journal based on international criteria and make accessible enriched data to researchers and publishers in open access format. Iran Medical Journal Information System. This database launched in 2017, covered medical science and health, include more than 424 titles of scientific journals with free access. We should note that the owner of this database is Ministry of Health, Treatment and Medical Training, who is in charge of give license, assessing and ranking scholar to journal and make accessible enriched data to researchers and publishers in open access format. National Digital Archives of Iranian Scientific Journals, which launched recently in the year 2020 and is infant and is newborn. Research finding. In the first step, the appearance structure of 5 database was examined in terms of: does it have its own ISSN number as an independent database? Does it have clear open access policy on website? Is its policy available and visible for user on the website? Does it have metadata infrastructure? What subject area does it cover? What kind of archiving policy does it have? Does it have preserving policy? In this figure, you can see, in this chart, you can see the appearance structure of database. 20% of this database has a valid ISSN number. 80% of database has clear policy. And 40% has visible and available policy on their website. Metadata infrastructure is available in 60% database. We should note that where a policy was not readily discoverable through an institution's webpage or repository, details were sought using a web search or by attempting to contact the repository manager or institution directly with mixed results. Direct correspondence with repository manager was undertaken, as mentioned above, and the policy details verified through them were added to the new version of database. In this figure, you can see the statute of subject field. All 60% of database covers all subject area. 20% of database cover health and medical, and 20% covers human science and Islamic subjects. In the case of archiving policy, around 40% has a pre-print and post-print archiving policy, and 60% had post-print archiving policy. And in the field of preservation policy, 80% has preservation policy, and 20% does not have preservation policy. In the next step, the policy of this database was compared with the indicators in the prepared checklist. You can see the checklist in this table that we study: valid ISSN, journal URL, publisher URL, unique URL, practice, affiliation, official license, DOI, application form, title in English language, PDF output, and etc. We will talk in next slide. 60% of database. In 60% of database, journals must have official local license to submit in the database. Having CC is not mandate for Iranian database, but for 80% of this database, having copyright is mandatory. And 60% of databases, for 60% of the databases are important that journals have policy URLs, specified policy URLs, unique URL per article, and each publisher should have publisher URL, and each journal should have its own URL. Application is important in 60% of database. Having application form in 60% database is mandated. 80% database prepare both HTML and PDF output for users. For none of the database, having DOI is not necessary for none of these databases. But if the journal has DOI or article has DOI, they consider it. Having table of contents and journal contact information is not mandate for 60% of databases, whereas 40 of them having bibliographic information is enough. All journal must have English title for submission. 60% of database journals should have a standard database, a standard website. In 60% database, last update, online publication, and being on time is necessary. Journal must have peer-reviewed issues and for submission in 60% of database. Conflict of interest should fill by journal in 60% of databases. Conclusion. Open access policy can be complex and varies according to geographical location. For instance, in Iran, publishers must have a license from relevant organizations such as Ministry of Science or Ministry of Health and Medical Science. On the other hand, first important point for this database is to have a license from these organizations. In this case, some journals that do not have this license or they have non-governmental publishers may be deprived of cooperation with this database. Iranian journal may not use CC, but respect for copyright under domestic law and open access database consideration. All databases emphasize on peer review original researchers, in this case, journal in which published translation of fundamental research article aren't indexed in this kind of databases. When we compare data establishments of database conclude that some databases such as Iran Journal are still in their infancy. At first glance, the OA policy landscape varies considerably across the country. National approach to OA different in emphasis, but not in substance. The key message that emerges from this study is that systematic policy implementation will require a fully functioning OA infrastructure that connects, improves, and integrates the current disparate collections of service. According to the study of open access databases such as DOAJ, the number of periodicals which index from Iran in mentioned database are more than 500 titles. This is quarter of the total number of open access periodicals in Iran. And this indicates that the status of Iranian open access periodicals is in transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hamide.
You're welcome.
I don't see any questions there right now, but we do have a minute. I thought I would just ask you, like what and I think you alluded to this, but if you could elaborate on what kind of the biggest challenges are to getting the researchers on board with this kind of big change that has been happening. Like how are they adapting to open access in Iran? Are you getting resistance? Are people excited about it? Oh, I don't know if you could hear my question, but we can actually move on. There's another question in the chat now. Somebody is wondering if the number of journals in Iran are they all active? Or are some of these journals ones that have discontinued?
Excuse me. E-journal or open access journal?
I think, I'm not sure. I think they're referring to some numbers you shared about the number of journals in Iran. And they're just wondering if they're all active.
We have 2,700 journals, e-journals in Iran.
And they're all current titles. Okay. Thank you, Hamide. If you wouldn't mind, quit sharing your screen, and we will move on to the next presentation.
Final presentation is entitled The Open Access Library of Humanities and the Open Access Revolution. Our presenter is Dr. Johanna Duffy. She is the head of library services at the Marino Institute of Education in Dublin, Ireland. She holds a PhD in cultural and social history and a postgraduate degree focused on library and information science. Her professional interests include open access, research support and learning, library publishing, digitization, civil rights, cultural and social history, and race relations. Johanna, the screen is yours.
Thank you.
Ted, if you would, okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Okay, this afternoon I'm going to talk about the move to open access scholarly publishing, which has been accelerating for many years. It is driven by many factors, including the fact that many academic libraries are reporting the rising cost of subscriptions, journals, a moral case that publicly funded research should be freely available for all to see, and a case that more dissemination of knowledge will lead to more innovation and therefore economic growth. As we have discussed this afternoon, open access is the practice of granting free web access to research articles and other products of research. Open access has been around since the 1970s, but key steps in this development, especially the 2002 Budapest Declaration, have accelerated this transition. The benefits of open access include no subscription necessary, greater visibility of your research, which is indexed by Google Scholar, Google, Bing, and Yahoo. The dissemination of knowledge, which provides a public good. It satisfies funding agency requirements, and it increases research exposure and citation rate. Some developments in Europe include Plan S, whereby publications resulting from research funded by public grants must be in compliant open access journals or platforms by 2021. This is mandated by Coalition S, which comprises of 16 national funders, 4 charitable and international funders, and the EU. Plan S has extended its remit to cover monographs and research-based edited collections by 2024. Open access refers to peer-reviewed academic research that is available freely to read and reuse online. Gold open access means that this service is provided by publishers. This usually means that a new business model is needed, as the material is free to read. It cannot be sold as a subscription. Many publishers are implementing this through article and book processing charges, APCs and BPCs. These, though, are unaffordable in the humanities disciplines. If one really wants the world to be a fully OA publishing ecosystem, then one has to be realistic about the economics of such a system and create functional and sustainable real-world strategies. One of the biggest concerns of open access is that shifting to an APC system from subscription fees may impede global participation. One such solution to this is the Open Library of Humanities. This is a charitable organisation dedicated to publishing world-leading open access humanities scholarship with no author-facing article APCs. The OLH is funded by an international consortium of libraries who have joined in the mission to make scholarly publishing fairer, more accessible, and rigorously preserved for the digital future. The OLH publishing platform supports academic journals from across humanities disciplines, as well as hosting its own multidisciplinary journal. The OLH has received 2 substantial grants from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to date and has built a sustainable business model with its partner libraries. All of their academic articles are subject to rigorous peer review, and the scholarship they publish showcases dynamic research taking place in the humanities disciplines today. Launched in 2015, their free-to-read, free-to-publish model was set up to revolutionize the field of open access publishing. 5 years on, their sustainable business model has attracted nearly 300 supporting institutions, with further revenue generated through hosting on their in-house open source publishing platform, Janeway, enabling the OLH to establish a thriving platform of 28 peer-reviewed open access journals. Their mission is to support and extend open access to scholarship in the humanities for free and to everyone. The OLH is part of a growing global community of not-for-profit publishers that explore different business models and innovative approaches to open publishing. It was established to challenge the costly, limited routes to open access publication in the humanities and find a sustainable business model to enable academic journals to publish peer-reviewed research without charges to author or reader. The model proposed by the OLH is one where publication costs do not fall on the institution or researchers, but are instead financed collaboratively through an international library consortium. Each member pays an annual fee according to the country and size of the institution, reducing and distributing the cost of publication across its members, with an economy of scale that improves as more institutions join. The idea is that research organizations and libraries make a relatively small contribution that covers the cost of running a publication platform on which peer-reviewed scholarly journals can then be published as open access. With this model, the OLH has expanded from 7 journals in 2015 to 28 journals in 2020. It has 4 full-time staff, funds 2 external commercial university presses to convert their journals to open access, and has developed and launched Janeway, its own field-leading innovative open source publishing platform developed fully in-house. The current level of APCs make gold open access publishing unaffordable for the majority of unfunded humanities scholars. The OLH aims instead to implement a collaborative funding model for gold open access in humanities. The library publishing subsidy is banded based on country and size of institution. This means lots of libraries all paying a small amount to make it work. In this mode, rather than institutions bearing the whole cost when their researchers need to publish, this model instead spreads costs across institutions, much like the advantageous aspects of the subscription model, except in this case, the results are made openly accessible. The model is extremely cost effective, with the base cost of approximately $500 per article. This covers ongoing technological costs, staff costs, digital preservation, and typesetting. When this is spread across institutions, with just 125 institutions participating at the higher level of banding, $1,000, the OLH is able to publish 250 articles per year. This would be a cost to each institution of $4 per open access article. This economy of scale improves as more institutions join. Existing journals can migrate onto the OLH platform. Institutions have a route to a transition for open access. This means that as journals that were previously with commercial publishers move across, participating libraries should see direct cancellations, allowing a transfer of budgets into funding open access. Part of the OLH model that makes it so appealing lies in this journal flipping program, where they seek to convert existing subscription titles to an open access model without fees. One of their most popular incorporations was a high-profile transfer in 2015 of the editorial board of Elsevier's journal Lingua to a new title, Glossa, published by Ubiquity Press, but funded by OLH and Ling OA. While negotiations with publishers remain difficult due to big deal bundling, such conversions nonetheless help the transition to an open access environment. Over half of OLH titles were previously subscription titles. In just 5 years, the OLH has established a platform of peer-reviewed academic journals, whose scholarly articles have received over 360,000 downloads worldwide. Last year, in 2019, the OLH published a total of 532 articles, 74 more articles than in 2018, without charging any APCs. 2019 saw a 13% increase in the number of articles downloaded across all OLH titles compared to 2018. 2019 also saw a 25% increase in the number of total website views across all OLH titles, from 696,646 to 870,324. Total article downloads across all OLH titles have, for all time to the 31st of December 2019, were 306,841. With regard to the OLH flagship journal readership, the OLH journal now has over 30 special collections, each focusing on curated content on specialist topics. In 2018, there were 20,544 users visiting the OLH journal website, a 66.36 increase on 2017. In 2019, this increased to 36,079, a 75.62 increase on the previous year. The OLH has worked hard to change the field of open access publishing by encouraging other organizations to use their model as the basis of their own open access publishing frameworks. Other businesses have also adopted this novel economic approach, resulting in over 4 million of worldwide revenue generation. According to JISC Collections, library crowd publishing company Reveal Digital has based its UK financial model on the Open Library of Humanities and has raised $4,258,681 to date. The Open Library of Humanities may be a small digital publisher, but as these sizable achievements show, this vision goes far beyond one company. The Open Library of Humanities has demonstrated that a model for high-quality open access publishing without APCs is possible and also sustainable in the long term. During their first 5 years, the Open Library of Humanities has made thousands of articles open access under a no-author fee system funded by their member libraries. They have shown that academic libraries are willing to pay for open infrastructure as part of their mission, and that scholars in the humanities do not oppose high-quality, peer-reviewed open access when there are no financial barriers. From its origins, the Open Library of Humanities asked academic libraries if they would continue to pay for these subscriptions if they became open access. And the answer was, and continues to be, a resounding yes. This has allowed the Open Library of Humanities team to celebrate 5 years and become financially independent. What is needed now is for other publishing houses to experiment with this model and adapt it to their respective needs. The main beneficiaries of a greater diffusion of consortium models like this will always be researchers, universities, and their increasingly tight budgets. In conclusion, to solidify the mission of the Open Library of Humanities and to show that open access can be achieved in the humanities, more combined work with universities and libraries is needed. It costs little and returns a lot. It will also aid initiatives in converting more journals and publishers to similar models, which spreads and reduces costs for all, making open access possible in all disciplines. In the future, it would be great to see a normalized assumption that research publishing is open access, and for it to become increasingly uncommon to hit a paywall. My hope is that APCs are going to be revealed as a damaging funding system for universal open access, because funds are not distributed evenly between institutions, and some people are not going to be able to afford to pay once the transition to open access is made. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation, Joanna. I'd like to start off with one question, since we do have a few minutes left. What measures can be taken to encourage further OA publishing models?
Initially, I'd say create awareness, promote models that are existing, and encourage collaboration between libraries and publishers, and equally seminars and conferences like we are attending today will encourage and inspire initiatives like this.
One more question before we turn things over to Ted. Are there issues in relation to copyright?
There's concerns in relation to copyright in relation to whether in the initial concern from researchers is that their work can be just taken by another researcher and not acknowledged. However, Creative Commons deals with this, but there's concerns in the sense of a fear that copyright won't be respected as it would in published outputs.
Well, we did get a question in the Q&A. Is it difficult administratively to get libraries to make a donation? Does paying without directly getting something in return pose an administrative problem?
There's a few difficulties in the sense that smaller libraries initially don't have a budget for publishing. So that's the first difficulty. In the project of the Open Library of Humanities, why I was quite drawn to it is it proved the mission that there is a willingness, and to now be at over 300 institutions committing to this open initiative shows that they can be overcome. And by cancelling subscriptions to previous publications and allocating it to open access, it's better for the library financially, and equally promotes the researchers more. But initially, it's to change, more so than financial, it's to change the mindset of the attitude to donating with not necessarily the same result, but actually a better result long term.
Thank you, Johanna, for answering these questions. And thank you again for your wonderful presentation. And I will turn things over to Ted.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank all the presenters today. This has been, honestly, is possibly even more enjoyable and interesting than I thought it would be. So I'm personally thrilled. I really do appreciate everybody's willingness to indulge in this international webinar. It is fascinating to hear from all over the world this way. So many of the things are strike home. Others, I think, encourage us to think in new ways about a problem we've all been wrestling with. We do have some time for any sort of broader questions that didn't get answered beforehand. Some of them may have come up in Q&A, which I'm happy to do. There is one that I hope everyone will indulge and will take advantage of the role of host here and ask. And it's the question, I don't know, it's the elephant in the room perhaps, is, and this is for each of the presenters, it'd be interesting to know from each of your perspectives, under the current conditions of COVID-19 and in the international pandemic, how have you seen this, or have you seen this show an impact on OA in your sort of part of the world, or your aspect of working with OA? So I'd ask any of you to chip in first, or we can go down the line again. So I don't know if anyone really wants to start. All right. I will do it first then. We'll go in order then. Andrea and Kimberly, is there anything about this that's had a notable impact in your work with OA?
Well, from the access point of view, one of the challenges, of course, is the people and institutions to whom we provide the access through Research for Life are dealing with remote working just like everyone else. So there's been a fair amount of need to support that aspect of things, just like libraries in any part of the world are trying to deal with their clientele who are dealing with remote. So that's not unique to open access, but it is a different factor that we're dealing with. Andrea?
Yeah, I mean, I could add the comment that what the COVID-19 pandemic has achieved is a huge amount of open access publication of the relevant literature, and very, right from the beginning. I think I heard someone comment at a conference last week that it's pretty impossible now to find a COVID-19 article that isn't open access, which is great, and actually indicates that all things are possible. And maybe the situation has prompted people to accelerate their thinking about shifting across to an open access model. So I think that could have a very positive outcome.
That makes sense to me. Felipe, Juan, have you seen anything from your work in Latin America or Mexico specifically?
Yes. The situation we are living has promoted open access, but there is an actor is important to consider: the role of the universities in Mexico and Latin America to support the publishing of outputs. Why this happened? Because at the universities, the scholarly work finalized when a paper is done. but they, and some universities don't think that it's necessary to spend money to publish. To get open access totally, is necessary also to consider expenditures, revenue expenditure for publishers. Not only to have done the research, and that's all. Also, the universities have to think in expend money to publish this output. It's necessary to consider in the budget this action, because although some universities have considered this, don't have money to edit or to publish some journals in the university. And also, it's important to consider the evaluation of scholarly role. Sometimes the evaluation of scholarly job is not considered totally to publish in open access. And also it's necessary to think other kind to measure the impact or scholarly work. There are many factors. There are many factors that need to be considered for join to the wide trend on open access that we are living in this moment.
We may have temporarily lost Ted. Hopefully he will be back soon. But thank you. Did anybody else, Hamide, do you want to chime in on the question of how the COVID situation has impacted the database access that you talked about?
Yes. During the COVID-19, databases, open access databases worked such as before this pandemic. But besides of them, digital library serve open access services to the users. For example, recently, National Library and Archive of Iran launched new database for journals, and it makes free access free access to the newspaper, to the journals that published since the 18th century. And some university libraries act in this way, and they serve open access services.
Thank you. How about you, Johanna?
Since COVID, I've seen quite a change where I work to the attitude of open access. When I arrived to the Marino Institute over a year ago, it was a word that was seldom mentioned, so obviously I highlighted open access at every opportunity. However, during COVID, I think by making more research material available online, by highlighting our repository, by highlighting open access initiatives even from publishers, there has been quite a transformation to both students and staff's attitude in the institute I work for the positive. And now 6 months on, in discussions and in LIS sessions, they're very receptive and are very keen to find out more, which is quite a dramatic turnaround from when I arrived. And even though I don't want COVID to be happening, this is one positive I've seen in my working life, library working life. So it's a positive reaction. I'm very keen to analyze the downloads of our repository this year. I think they'll be substantially different than they have actually ever been. So at least one positive to do with the situation.
Fantastic, thank you. And I appreciate our speakers going in and answering some of the questions that were coming in live while they were talking. I don't know if all of our viewers were following those conversations, and so I just wanted to give an opportunity if anybody had one or so question that really kind of stood out to them that they would like folks to hear an answer to. Okay, not seeing anything. We do have a couple of people raising their hands, and I apologize, but we're not enabling other audience members to speak. So if you could type your question, if you have it, into the Q&A, that would be fantastic. So I have a question for Johanna that popped up while you were presenting. Maybe you mentioned this, but maybe to expand on it, you mentioned kind of the impact of OLH. And I wondered if from the researcher's perspective, if the downloads and visitors to the site were sort of impacting how the people that are writing that content are adapting or changing, or maybe they're not, their own way they describe the impact of their work, because I know where I'm at, you know, things like impact factor and that type of thing are a little bit harder to use in the humanities, and I thought maybe something like OLH would contribute to how they use some of the data about those views and downloads that you talked about.
I think that's part of their selling point in a way, because previous to working in library, I worked in humanities, and that was something, while I was fascinated with open access, it is a concern when you're working in the area and you're thinking of journal impact. But for some, which is because of their business model and their approach, it's a combination, the organization of academics and librarians. So they have this in mind, and the way they're pitching it, that it's becoming so well esteemed. So some of their funder organizations are Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Cambridge. It seems to be their approach, because it's so collaborative, is breaking barriers that in a way the impact is becoming less important, and they're gaining, well, less important, but because of their approach, their open access journal are having a substantial impact as well. I haven't found any data to say what their impact per se is, but increasingly people want to subscribe, and I think it's because there's the 300 plus of small and large scale institutions, is in a way the prestige is following naturally, if that makes sense.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So unfortunately, our host for the session, Ted, seems to have had a difficulty and has not rejoined us. I will do my best to wrap this up on his behalf. First of all, thank you, panelists, again, for joining us. We really appreciate, as he said, the diverse viewpoints from around the world. That was fascinating. I hope everybody else enjoyed the presentations as well. We have recorded this session, so we hope to make it available on the IFLA serials and other continuing resources website in the not too distant future. I don't have an exact date, but check out that our committee's page and there will be a link there eventually. If our panelists are agreeable, I know there were a few questions about sharing related slides, so if panelists are willing to do that, we can make a space to link to those as well. So I'll just mention that. We certainly thank all the attendees for coming. We appreciate that some of you are joining us very early in the morning, some of you very late at night. So we're excited for this, and we certainly appreciate you giving our committee a chance to have our program that we would have had in Dublin this year, and unfortunately we're not able to. So thank you again. We appreciate you all, and we hope to see you at a future IFLA World Library and Information Congress.